My girlfriend said. I'm tired of pretending you're enough for the future I want. I calmly accepted it, moved out the following morning, and never contacted her again. 11 months later, she saw my interview about financial success shared across social media while working overtime at a job she hated. I'm tired of pretending you're enough for the future I want. She said it the way someone reads an expiration date off a milk carton. Flat. Casual. Like she'd rehearsed it so many times in the mirror that the feeling had completely dried out of it. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in our kitchen, holding a mug of coffee I'd made for both of us, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger. Not the burning kind of hurt you see in movies where the guy throws something or storms out. What I felt was quieter than that. It was the particular stillness that comes right after a door closes behind someone and you realize they're not coming back. And somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the shock and the silence and the coffee going cold in my hands, a small, very clear part of me thought, okay, so that's what this was. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me back up just enough for this to make sense. I'm 26 years old, together with Cassidy for just over 3 years. We shared a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, the kind with the exposed brick that looks good in photos and costs too much for what you actually get. That's all you need to know going in. Cassidy was the kind of woman who had a 5-year plan tattooed on the inside of her brain. Not a bad thing. Actually, when we first started dating, it was one of the things I found most attractive about her. She had direction. She knew what she wanted. A corner office. A house in Westchester or maybe Connecticut. A partner who matched all of it. The ambition, the address, the income bracket. I was 23 when we got together, working a mid-level marketing coordinator role at a decent but not spectacular firm. Saving money slowly. Building things quietly. She was 24 and already a junior associate at a PR firm that worked with brands you'd actually recognize. We fit, at first. Or at least, we both believed we did. The first time I noticed the shift, I almost talked myself out of it. We were at a dinner with 2 of her work friends and their partners, Garrett and his girlfriend Summer, and another couple I'd never met before. The conversation turned to apartments, then to salaries, then to investment properties, the way conversations do in your mid-20s when everyone is trying to figure out if they're behind or ahead. Garrett mentioned he'd just gotten a significant raise. Summer mentioned they were looking at condos in Hoboken. The other couple nodded knowingly. And Cassidy, I caught it for just a second, glanced at me. Not the warm, proud kind of glance. The other kind. The kind that calculates. She looked away immediately and laughed at something someone said. But I'd seen it. I filed it away. I told myself it meant nothing. 3 weeks later, we had the first version of the conversation. Not the final one. The rehearsal. She said she'd been thinking a lot about where we were headed. She said she loved me, but she also needed to think about what her life looked like in 5 years. She said the word trajectory 4 times. I asked her what she actually meant. She said she just wanted us both to be realistic about things. I said I was realistic. She said she knew. She said that wasn't the problem. I didn't push further. Looking back, I should have asked the question I was actually thinking, which was, is the problem that you've already decided I'm not enough, and you're just figuring out the timing? But I didn't ask that. Instead, I said I understood, and we should probably sleep on it. She agreed. We did. The next morning she made pancakes and acted like nothing had happened. I ate them and acted the same. For about 2 months after that, things were almost normal. Not normal. Almost. There was a new texture to the air between us. A slight static. The way a room feels when someone has just had an argument in it and tried to clean up before you arrived. You can't see anything wrong, but your skin knows. I started working on a side project during that time. Nothing glamorous. Just an idea I'd had for about a year, a content strategy consultancy, basically. Helping small and mid-sized businesses build their digital presence in a way that actually converted instead of just looking good. I'd been freelancing on nights and weekends for a few months, taking on small clients, learning what worked. I mentioned it to Cassidy once. She smiled the way adults smile at a child who tells them they want to be an astronaut. Warm. Supportive. Completely unconvinced. That's cute, she said. She wasn't being cruel. That was the thing. She genuinely meant it as encouragement. She just didn't believe it was real. I didn't push back. I just went back to my laptop that night and kept building. I want to be very clear about something. I am not the kind of person who turns a breakup into a redemption arc and then goes back to prove something. That is not what this is. What happened next was not about Cassidy. It was about me and what I already knew I had in me, and what that quiet 2 months of static had finally made impossible to ignore. The side projects started picking up. 1 client became 3. 3 became 7. I was making more from the consultancy on the side than I was from my actual job, and that fact hit me one Tuesday night in October like a bucket of cold water to the face. I didn't tell Cassidy any of this. Not because I was hiding it. More because by that point, I'd learned that sharing early-stage things with her was like planting seeds in concrete. The effort wasn't worth the harvest. The morning she said it, the "I'm tired of pretending" morning, we'd had a small argument the night before. Not about the business. About something stupid. Plans she'd changed at the last minute. Something about a work event she'd double-booked herself on, and how she needed me to be more flexible about things like that. I said I was always flexible. She said she knew I tried. She said it in a way that meant she didn't think I actually did. I went to sleep frustrated. She went to sleep quiet. The next morning I woke up before her, made coffee, stood in the kitchen in the gray light, and she came in with that specific kind of composure that people put on when they've made a decision in the dark. She sat down across from me at the kitchen island. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said it. "I'm tired of pretending you're enough for the future I want." I set the coffee mug down. I looked at her. She held my gaze. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She had the expression of someone who had spent so long preparing for a hard conversation that by the time they arrived at it, the hardness had been replaced with something worse. "Relief." She said. "A while." I said, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She said, "I kept hoping things would change." I said, "What things?" She said, "You know what things." And I did. She meant money. She meant status. She meant the 5-year plan, and whether I was in it or whether I was the thing that complicated it. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay." Just that. Just okay. She blinked. I think she expected more. An argument, maybe. A defense. The part where I tell her she's wrong about me and she either agrees or she doesn't. But I had nothing to defend. Not because she was right. Because I was done. Something in me, something I hadn't even been consciously aware of, just closed. Quietly. The way a book closes after the last page. I went to our bedroom. I pulled a duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. I packed 4 days of clothes, my laptop, my hard drives, my notebooks. The practical things. The things you need to keep functioning. She came to the doorway and watched me. "What are you doing?" she said. "Leaving," I said. "Tonight. I'll get the rest of my things in the morning." She stood there for a moment. "You don't want to talk about this more?" "No," I said. Not angry. Not cold. Just no. There was nothing left to say that would make this better than it already wasn't. I slept at my friend Travis's place that night. He didn't ask many questions. He handed me a beer, put on something mindless on TV, and let the night pass. That's the kind of friend you need when everything you thought was solid turns out to have been cardboard. I was back at the apartment by 7 the next morning while she was in the shower. I moved efficiently. Books, files, a few pieces of furniture I'd brought in. I took my coffee maker. That was deliberate. By 9:15, I was gone. I texted her once. "I got the rest of my things. I hope you find what you're looking for." I meant it. No sarcasm. No residue. She replied, "I'm sorry it ended like this." I read it. I put my phone in my jacket pocket. And I never contacted her again. Here is where I need to tell you what was already in motion, because context matters. By that October, the same month she said what she said, I had 7 paying clients. 3 of them were mid-sized e-commerce brands with real budgets. One was a tech startup that had just closed a Series A and needed someone to build their content infrastructure from scratch. I had been quietly negotiating that contract for 2 weeks. I hadn't told Cassidy because every time I tried to share things in that early stage, she'd ask how much it paid. And when I gave a number that wasn't yet impressive, the conversation would die in a specific way that made me feel stupid for bringing it up at all. So I'd stopped bringing things up. And she'd interpreted that silence as stagnation. Which, to be fair to her, I understand how she got there. But understanding how someone arrives at a wrong conclusion doesn't make the conclusion less wrong. I quit my job in November, 11 days after leaving Cassidy's apartment for the last time. My manager looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. I told him I appreciated the opportunities, shook his hand, and walked out into a cold Tuesday afternoon in Midtown that felt, inexplicably, like the first day of something. Travis let me crash on his couch for 6 weeks while I transitioned. I kept my expenses razor thin. Groceries, coffee, laptop charger. That was basically it. I worked 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. Not from desperation. From momentum. There's a difference, and you can feel it in your body. Desperation is tight and frantic. It makes you sloppy. Momentum is clean. It carries you forward without you having to think about every step. I was riding momentum for the first time in years. By February, I had 12 clients. By April, I'd hired 2 people. Riker, who handled analytics and reporting, and Paige, who managed client communications and project timelines. They were both younger than me, both brilliant, both working remotely from different parts of the country. The startup client renewed their contract and doubled their scope. I moved out of Travis's place and into a 1-bedroom in the West Village that cost more than anywhere I'd ever lived. I remember standing in the empty apartment the first afternoon, all my stuff in a heap in the corner, and looking out the window at the street below. Just looking. Not thinking anything specific. Just aware, in a very simple, unadorned way, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Riker was the one who pushed me to do the interview. There was a podcast, reasonably well known in the digital marketing and startup space, that focused on founders and operators who had made unconventional career jumps. Riker had been listening to it since before he came to work with me. He sent me the host's contact information with a 1-line message. You should be on this. I'm not joking. I sat on it for 3 weeks. Then I said yes. The recording happened in early August, almost 10 months after I'd walked out of that Brooklyn apartment with a duffel bag and a coffee maker. Not softballs, not gotchas, the real kind. The kind that make you reach back and articulate things you've been doing instinctively. She asked about the pivot. About what it had cost me. About what I'd learned in the first 6 months. I was honest throughout. I didn't perform anything. I didn't talk about Cassidy. There was no reason to. She wasn't part of the story I was telling. She was just a door that had closed. I want to slow down here. Because the next part is the part people find interesting. And I want to be careful about how I tell it. 11 months after the morning in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday in September, early afternoon. I was sitting in a coffee shop in the village, going through client reports with Paige over a video call, half present, half somewhere else. My phone started buzzing. Not normal buzzing, the sustained, overlapping kind, where notifications stack on top of each other before the previous one has finished landing. I glanced at it. LinkedIn, Instagram, a few texts. Someone had shared the podcast clip on LinkedIn. One of those short-form edit clips, maybe 90 seconds, the part where I talked about leaving a stable job with no safety net and why I'd never once regretted it. A marketing industry account with a large following had reposted it. Then someone else had reposted it. Then a few more. By the time I checked, the original clip had over 100,000 views and was climbing. I put my phone face down on the table and kept going through the reports. Not because I was trying to be cool about it. Because it genuinely mattered less to me than finishing what I was working on. That, I think, is the detail that would have shocked Cassidy most. I found out about her seeing it the way you find out about most things when you've moved on, third party, secondhand, with a slight delay. Travis texted me. He said, "You're going to think this is funny." Then, "Cassidy saw your interview thing. She's been sharing it to people." Then, not tagging you. Just showing people. Like, "Look at this." Then, I heard from Reagan that she's been having a rough few months. Job stuff. I read all 4 messages. I thought about how to respond for about 30 seconds. Then I wrote back, "Okay." Travis replied with a single laughing emoji and then nothing else. That was the entire conversation. Reagan, mutual friend, still in Cassidy's circle, apparently reached out to Travis separately around the same time. From what he gathered and later told me over dinner, Cassidy had been let go from the PR firm in the spring. Something about restructuring. She'd taken a new position at a different agency, but it was a lateral move at best, possibly a slight step back, and she was working longer hours for less autonomy. She'd seen the clip while working late on a night she'd already pushed past 10. She'd watched it all the way through, and then she'd shared it to several people in her network, without a caption. Reagan told Travis that when she'd asked Cassidy why she'd shared it, Cassidy had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, "I just think it's impressive. That's all. I just think it's impressive." I've spent some time sitting with that sentence. Not obsessing. Just sitting with it the way you'd turn an unfamiliar object over in your hands. I just think it's impressive. Not, I was wrong. Not, I underestimated him. Not anything that required her to directly revisit the morning in the kitchen and what she'd said standing there in the gray light. Just impressive, which is, when you strip it all back, the most revealing word she could have chosen. Because impressive is what you say about a stranger. Impressive is what you say about someone whose success is theoretical to you. Impressive is the word you use when the person across from you has stopped being a character in your story and become something else entirely. Something outside the frame. Reagan asked Travis, at some point in that same conversation, whether I knew about Cassidy's situation. Travis said he'd told me. Reagan apparently paused and then asked, "Did he say anything?" Travis said, "He said okay." I don't know how Reagan received that. I don't know if it made Cassidy feel better or worse when she eventually heard it. That's not my business anymore. It was never really my problem to manage. I want to say something clearly, because I think these stories get misread in a specific way. This is not about winning. I know how it reads. She said he wasn't enough. He left quietly. He built something real. She struggled. She saw his face on the internet at a job she hated. The algorithm wrote him a revenge arc. And if you want to read it that way, I can't stop you. But that's not what it was. What it actually was, is simpler and less dramatic than that. She was honest about what she wanted. She wanted someone who matched a specific image of success. She used the word enough and meant it in a way that had a dollar amount attached to it. And when I heard that, I didn't collapse into proving her wrong. I just stopped. I stopped trying to fit into the frame she'd built. I stopped performing the version of me that was still auditioning for a role I'd never actually be cast in. And when you stop auditioning for a life that isn't yours, something strange and wonderful and completely silent happens. You find out what you actually are when nobody is watching. The consultancy is still growing. Riker and Paige are still with me. We added a third person, a strategist named Garrett, no relation to Cassidy's work friend, in late spring. The West Village apartment is still where I live. The coffee maker I took that morning is on my counter right now. I use it every single day. I don't think about Cassidy often. When I do, it's not with bitterness. It's not with triumph, either. It's with a kind of clarity that I wouldn't have gotten to any other way. She told me the truth that morning, even if she framed it in a way that was designed to diminish me. And the truth, the actual truth underneath the diminishment, was that she couldn't see me. Not who I was. Not what I was building. Not what was already there, waiting. She saw the surface. The job title. The number on the check. The way I compared to the other men at the table at that dinner. She could not see past the numbers to the engine running underneath them. And I can't be angry at someone for not being able to see something. You either have that kind of vision or you don't. The last thing I'll say is this. There's a version of this story where I spent the 11 months after that kitchen conversation thinking about her. Where every client I landed and every contract I signed was a message aimed in her direction. Where the interview, the clip, the 100,000 views, all of it was secretly addressed to her. Some men live that story. I understand why. Anger is fuel. Pain is a kind of engine. But I didn't live that story. I lived a different one. I spent those 11 months building something I could look at and recognize. Something that felt, from the inside, like it had always been mine. Not built for an audience. Not shaped by someone else's 5-year plan. Not calibrated to impress anyone sitting across from me at a kitchen island in the gray morning light. Just mine. And when the clip went everywhere, and Travis texted me, and I read about Cassidy watching it alone at a job she didn't love on a night that was already too long, I felt something. I want to be honest about that. I did feel something. But it wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't pity either. It was closer to recognition. The recognition of what it feels like to be seen too late by someone who decided too early. She said I wasn't enough for the future she wanted. She was right. I was building something much larger than that future. She just couldn't see it yet. And by the time she could, I'd already stopped looking back.